Did the prisoners survive, or did the bay swallow them whole? Alcatraz was not just a prison. It was a fortress built on an island in the middle of San Francisco Bay, surrounded by freezing waters and deadly currents. The government sent the most dangerous men there, criminals who had escaped other prisons, men who were never supposed to get out again. Yet in June 1962, 3 of them, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, vanished into the night. The FBI claimed they drowned, but that never ended the debate. Over the years, rumors, sightings, photos, and even letters surfaced, each one hinting at survival. Families believed. Tourists wondered. Conspiracy theorists argued. Books and movies made the escape legendary, and all the while, the truth stayed hidden under the waves. In 2025, however, new discoveries finally gave investigators the missing piece. The mystery of Alcatraz was no longer about whether they made it to freedom. It was about something far more disturbing. What really happened after the men slipped out of their cells and into history? The impossible prison Alcatraz was never meant to be just another prison. It was built as a final answer. Rising from a lonely rock in the middle of San Francisco Bay, the island seemed untouchable. The waters around it were dark, icy cold, and filled with shifting currents strong enough to drag down even the best swimmers. The prison itself stood like a fortress, with thick walls, steel bars, and guards who never took their eyes off the inmates. This was where the United States government sent the men who had beaten every other system. Bank robbers, escape artists, mob bosses, criminals who always found a way out. On Alcatraz, escape was supposed to be impossible. That was the whole point. The island told a message to anyone who looked across the bay. You can come here, but you will never leave. Yet, despite its terrifying reputation, the prison became the stage for the most daring escape attempt in American history. In June of 1962, 3 men decided to test the walls, the waters, and the myth itself. They were not reckless. They were patient, clever, and determined. Alcatraz was meant to stop them. Instead, it became the setting for a story that would haunt investigators, inspire movies, and puzzle the world for more than half a century. 3 men vanish on the night of June 11, 1962. 3 prisoners prepared for a gamble no one believed was possible. Frank Morris, a brilliant thinker with an IQ in the top 2%, and the Anglin brothers, John and Clarence, seasoned bank robbers with a history of escapes, worked silently in their cells. For months, they had been carving holes in the back walls using spoons, scrap metal, and even a homemade drill. Behind those walls lay a hidden utility corridor that led them upward and out of the prison's reach. To hide their work, they placed cardboard painted to look like the wall itself and masked the noise with accordion music. The plan was as simple as it was daring. Slip through the holes, climb to the roof, and vanish into the night. But they needed more than just a way out. Using over 50 stolen raincoats, they built a makeshift raft and life vests. To fool the guards, they sculpted dummy heads from soap, toilet paper, and cement dust, even covering them with real hair from the prison barber shop. When the guards checked that night, the prisoners seemed asleep in their bunks. By morning, the truth was revealed. The cells were empty, the men were gone, and Alcatraz had just lost its first and only escape. Frank Morris's genius. Frank Morris was not an ordinary inmate. Long before Alcatraz, he had gained a reputation as both a criminal and a mastermind. His intelligence reportedly ranked in the top 2% of the population, and he had used that sharp mind to plan multiple escapes from prisons across the country. He studied weaknesses, thought several steps ahead, and never gave up. On Alcatraz, he saw what most prisoners did not: small flaws in the fortress that could be turned into opportunities. The concrete walls, though thick, could be chipped away piece by piece. The noise of digging could be hidden by music. Even the guards' routine, bed checks, could be tricked with fake heads. Morris became the brain behind the operation, carefully guiding each step with patience and precision. He turned spoons into tools, raincoats into life vests, and scraps into survival gear. Where others saw an impossible cage, he saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. His ability to organize, calculate, and innovate transformed a desperate dream into a working plan. Without his leadership, the escape may never have gone beyond an idea, but with Morris at the center, Alcatraz's strongest prisoner became its greatest weakness, and the mastermind of the most legendary escape attempt in history. The Anglin brothers, John and Clarence Anglin, were not just criminals, they were survivors. Born into a poor farming family in Georgia, the brothers grew up learning to rely on each other for everything. Their bond was unshakable, and wherever one went, the other followed. By the time they were adults, they had turned to robbing banks, but even in crime, they followed strict rules: never use violence, never hurt anyone. What made them dangerous was not brutality, but their uncanny ability to slip through the cracks of prison walls. The Anglins had already escaped from several facilities before Alcatraz, earning them a reputation as persistent and resourceful escape artists. When they were eventually sent to the Rock, it wasn't because of their crimes alone. It was because other prisons could no longer hold them. On Alcatraz, their loyalty and determination became essential. While Frank Morris brought intelligence and planning, the Anglins brought skill, muscle, and trust. They chipped at the walls night after night, crafted dummy heads with incredible detail, and gathered materials for the raft. But more than that, their brotherhood gave the escape its heart. For the Anglins, freedom was not just survival. It was about staying together, no matter the risk. And on that fateful night in 1962, they vanished side by side. Digging the escape holes, the escape began with something small, a hole no larger than a fist. Each night after lights out, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers chipped away at the back walls of their cells. They used spoons stolen from the cafeteria, broken pieces of mop handles, and even a crude drill built from a vacuum cleaner motor. Progress was painfully slow, but patience was their greatest weapon. To muffle the sound of scraping concrete, the Anglins played an accordion during music hours, blending the noise into harmless background sound. Bit by bit, chunks of the wall crumbled, revealing a hidden utility corridor just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Every morning before guards made rounds, they disguised the holes with painted cardboard cutouts, perfectly matched to the wall's surface. From a distance, it looked untouched. No one suspected what was happening night after night inside those cramped cells. This was not reckless desperation. It was careful, methodical engineering. It took months of backbreaking effort, but eventually, the holes became large enough to crawl through. Behind them lay freedom, or at least the first step toward it. With every scrape, every speck of dust swept away, the men were carving more than a hole in concrete. They were carving a path into history. Building the raft, escaping Alcatraz meant more than breaking out of a cell. It meant surviving the deadly waters of San Francisco Bay. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers knew that swimming alone was suicide. The currents were too strong, the water too cold, so they built something no one expected: a raft. Using more than 50 stolen raincoats, they stitched and glued the material together with homemade adhesive made from prison workshop supplies and heat from steam pipes. Piece by piece, the coats became watertight, forming both a large raft and several life vests. The ingenuity was staggering. Every detail was designed with survival in mind. They fashioned paddles from scrap wood and metal, and even made a pump to inflate the raft quickly. To hide the bulky materials, they stored them in the hidden utility corridor behind their cells, adding to the stockpile night after night. When the escape night came, the raft was their lifeline, a fragile hope floating on treacherous waters. It wasn't just a tool, it was the symbol of their daring plan. If it worked, it would carry them to freedom. If it failed, the bay would claim them forever. For the first time, the impossible prison had a crack in its armor. Fooling the guards, even the most brilliant escape, would have failed if the guards discovered the plan too soon. Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers understood this, and so they turned their cells into stages of deception. Knowing that guards made nightly head counts, they created lifelike dummy heads to leave in their beds. Using soap, concrete dust, and toilet paper, they sculpted faces with incredible detail. Real hair, stolen from the prison barber shop, was glued on to make them even more convincing. At night, they placed these dummies on their pillows, tucking blankets around them so that in the dim light, it looked like the men were sleeping soundly. From the corridor, nothing seemed unusual. Guards shined their flashlights, saw heads on pillows, and moved on without suspicion. Meanwhile, behind the walls, the escapees slipped through their holes, climbing into the hidden utility corridor. Every detail was carefully planned. The heads bought them hours of precious time, enough to reach the roof and prepare for the final stage of their escape. By the time the morning roll call revealed the truth, the prisoners were already long gone. Their genius lay not just in breaking out, but in making the impossible look ordinary, right under the guards' noses. The search begins when the guards finally discovered the empty cells on the morning of June 12, 1962. Chaos erupted inside Alcatraz. The dummies were pulled away, the holes in the walls exposed, and the alarm was sounded across the island. Within hours, the most intense manhunt in the prison's history was underway. The FBI, Coast Guard, and local police joined forces, flooding the San Francisco Bay with patrol boats, helicopters, and search teams. They scoured the water, the shorelines, and every island nearby. Soon, they found fragments, pieces of the makeshift raft, a homemade paddle, and personal items that appeared to belong to the Anglin Brothers. Near Angel Island, more debris was recovered, raising questions: had the men drowned in the cold waters, or had they reached land? Despite the search stretching for weeks, no bodies were ever found. Officials concluded that the escapees had drowned, swept under by the freezing currents. But the lack of proof left the world divided. For some, the search proved the men had perished. For others, the absence of bodies meant one thing: they had outsmarted the system and survived. The search had ended, but the mystery was only just beginning. Did they drown? The official story declared that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers never made it out alive. According to the FBI, the freezing waters of San Francisco Bay, combined with powerful currents, doomed the men the moment they launched their raft. Investigators argued that even if the raft held together, the odds of surviving a 2-mile journey across icy waves in the middle of the night were nearly zero. Pieces of the raft and a paddle washed up near Angel Island, and a wallet filled with family photos, supposedly belonging to one of the Anglins, was also recovered. To authorities, this was proof the escape had ended in tragedy. Yet doubts refused to fade. Why were no bodies found, despite the massive search? Why were the photographs in the wallet dry, as if carefully protected? And why did witnesses over the years claim sightings of the brothers in faraway places? The drowning theory gave the public closure, but it never answered everything. For decades, people questioned whether the FBI had chosen the simplest conclusion to avoid embarrassment. Maybe the men drowned. Maybe they didn't. With no bodies and no final proof, the debate only grew louder, fueling one of America's greatest mysteries. Rumors of survival. Even as the FBI insisted the men drowned, stories of survival began to surface almost immediately. Some came from strangers, others from family members who swore they had seen or heard from the Anglin brothers after 1962. Their mother, year after year, received flowers on Mother's Day, always sent anonymously. At her funeral, 2 women in heavy makeup were spotted in the crowd. Some believed they were the brothers in disguise, paying their last respects. In the 1970s, a photograph taken in Brazil showed 2 men who bore a striking resemblance to John and Clarence Anglin. The picture spread widely, fueling endless debates about its authenticity. In 2018, a letter arrived at a San Francisco police station, allegedly written by John Anglin himself. The shaky handwriting claimed all 3 had survived, with Frank dying in 2008, Clarence in 2011, and John now ill with cancer. The FBI tested it, but the results were inconclusive, not confirmed but not denied either. Each story, each clue kept the mystery alive. Were these men living quietly under new names? Had they started over in South America? Or were these just coincidences, hoaxes, and desperate hopes? Rumors of survival turned the Alcatraz escape into legend, and legend refused to die. The 2018 letter in January 2018, a startling twist reignited the Alcatraz mystery. A handwritten letter arrived at a San Francisco police station, signed by none other than John Anglin. In shaky script, the writer claimed he was the last surviving escapee. He confessed that Frank Morris had died in 2008 and Clarence Anglin in 2011, leaving him alone, battling cancer, and ready to surrender, on one condition. He wanted medical treatment in exchange. The letter was tested for fingerprints, DNA, and handwriting analysis, but the FBI's conclusion was vague, inconclusive. It was neither fully authenticated nor outright dismissed. This uncertainty only deepened the debate. If real, it meant the three men had beaten Alcatraz and lived free for decades, hiding in plain sight. If fake, it was just another cruel trick, one of many that plagued investigators over the years. Still, the tone of the letter felt desperate, filled with wariness that seemed difficult to fake. Why would someone go to such lengths after so many years? The 2018 letter didn't solve the mystery, but it pushed it back into the headlines, reminding the world that the Alcatraz escape was not just history. It was a living puzzle waiting for answers. Sightings and hoaxes through the years, the Alcatraz escape fueled endless claims, some believable, others pure fantasy. Reports poured in from across the world. In 1965, a tip suggested the escapees were living on a farm in Mexico. Years later, a tourist swore he met the Anglin Brothers while traveling in South America. The most famous evidence was a photograph taken in Brazil in 1975 showing two men with a striking resemblance to John and Clarence. To many, it was proof. To skeptics, just coincidence. Alongside these came a flood of hoaxes. People stepped forward pretending to be the escapees, while others tried selling fake maps, blueprints, or even personal belongings supposedly used in the breakout. Some authors even wrote entire books claiming they knew the men's fate. Most of these stories collapsed under investigation, yet the sheer number of them kept the mystery alive. Each claim, whether true or false, fueled the legend that maybe, just maybe, the men had really made it. For investigators, the challenge wasn't the lack of leads. It was too many conflicting ones. The truth was buried beneath layers of lies, sightings, and half-answers. Every hoax made the real story harder to find, but it also kept the world watching. A scan of the bay in 2025, the mystery of Alcatraz took an unexpected turn during a routine engineering project. A private firm had been hired to survey the seafloor near the Golden Gate Bridge, mapping sediment and checking for hazards before construction. At first, the sonar scans looked ordinary, jagged rocks, shifting mud, and natural pockets beneath the bay. But one formation stood out. It was too clean, too symmetrical, too man-made. Roughly the size of a small shipping container, it appeared buried deep under silt, just a mile from Alcatraz itself. Technicians cleaned up the scans, sharpened the images, and realized this wasn't a natural shape at all. Intrigued, authorities were notified, and divers were sent to investigate. Fighting poor visibility and strong currents, they eventually confirmed what the sonar had revealed. A sealed metallic structure, encrusted with decades of marine growth, resting silently in the mud. No record of it existed in naval logs or shipping reports. It was a ghost on the seafloor, and whispers began spreading. Was it military storage, smuggler cargo, or something connected to the infamous escape? No one yet imagined what was truly inside, but the discovery was about to rewrite history and shatter a mystery that had lasted more than 60 years. Discovery beneath the water. When divers finally reached the strange object beneath the bay, they realized it was no ordinary wreck. Buried under decades of silt, the structure was a rectangular container, sealed tight and covered in corrosion. Its riveted seams and locking mechanism suggested it wasn't accidental. It had been built with purpose. The discovery stunned investigators. There were no shipping records, no missing vessels, nothing to explain how such an object had ended up so close to Alcatraz. As rumors spread, a recovery barge was brought in. After hours of careful effort, the container broke the surface, water cascading off its sides. It was heavier than expected, yet eerily intact. Engineers assumed they'd find old equipment, contraband, or perhaps military relics. But when the container was finally pried open, the scene inside froze the recovery team in shock. It wasn't cargo waiting to be identified. It was 3 human bodies, curled together on the floor, preserved in the dry air as if time itself had stopped. Their clothing matched 1960s prison uniforms, and one figure still clutched a crude raincoat vest. A torn scrap of paper with shaky handwriting lay between cold fingers. The words read, "We made it, but we can't leave." The hidden container. The container was unlike anything investigators had ever seen. Though rusted on the outside, its interior was dry and eerily preserved, as if sealed against time itself. The walls were lined with scavenged metal plates, riveted together with crude precision. Evidence of food storage, a small water tank, and even ventilation shafts suggested this was no accident. It was a survival capsule. Whoever built it had intended it to keep people alive, at least for a short while. The chilling part was who was inside. The 3 bodies were confirmed as Frank Morris and the Anglin Brothers, the same men who had vanished from Alcatraz in 1962. DNA testing and dental records left no doubt. After more than 60 years of speculation, the mystery had a grim answer. But the discovery also raised darker questions. How had 3 escapees managed to construct such a capsule in secret? Where had they gathered the parts, and who helped them anchor it on the seafloor? Most unsettling of all, why would they seal themselves inside, with no clear way out? The hidden container solved one mystery but opened another, replacing the dream of freedom with a vision of entrapment far stranger than anyone had imagined. 3 bodies found. When forensic teams examined the contents of the container, the truth struck with chilling clarity. Inside lay the preserved remains of Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin, the 3 escapees who had defied Alcatraz in 1962. Their uniforms were faded and water-stained but unmistakably those of the prison. One body still wore a crude raincoat vest, proof of the escape plan. Another clutched a homemade lantern fashioned from scraps. Between the stiff fingers of the third was a torn piece of paper scrawled with the haunting words, "We made it, but we can't leave." The sight stunned investigators. For decades, people argued they had drowned or vanished into new lives abroad. Now the evidence lay before them, unmoving, undeniable. The DNA tests matched the families, and dental records confirmed it beyond doubt. These were not strangers. They were the men who had outsmarted the rock, only to meet their end in a strange, self-made tomb. For the first time in 60 years, the mystery of their fate was solved. But the answers were darker than the legends. They had made it off the island, but not into freedom. Their victory ended beneath the bay, waiting for history to find them. Chilling note inside among the preserved bodies, investigators found something that turned the discovery from tragic to haunting. A torn scrap of paper, clutched tightly in one man's hand. The writing, shaky and almost frantic, carried just one line, "We made it, but we can't leave." Those words changed everything. For decades, the world wondered if the men drowned in the bay or lived new lives in secret. Now, the note revealed they had succeeded in escaping Alcatraz, but something had gone terribly wrong. Did they build the container as a safe house, waiting for the search to die down, only for their air to run out? Did help never arrive? The fact that the note existed at all showed they understood the cruel irony of their situation. They had beaten the impossible prison, only to be trapped in their own invention. Investigators believe Frank Morris may have written it, a final message to prove they had made it farther than anyone believed. The note, preserved for more than 60 years, is now one of the most chilling artifacts in American criminal history. It answered the question that haunted generations. Yes, they made it. But freedom slipped away inside a steel coffin beneath the sea. The survival capsule, what investigators uncovered, was more than a container. It was a survival capsule, a desperate invention born from genius and fear. Inside, the walls had been reinforced with scavenged metal plates, the seams sealed with crude tar-like substances, and traces of ventilation shafts suggested they had attempted to design an air system. There were remnants of food storage and a small water tank, proving this was not a random hiding spot, but a carefully planned bunker. Forensic experts believe the capsule was meant to serve as a temporary refuge, a place to wait until the search above cooled down. It showed months, maybe years, of preparation, work done in absolute secrecy under the noses of guards. But while the craftsmanship was ingenious, it was also deeply flawed. There was no renewable air source, no emergency release, no failsafe. Once sealed inside, the men had bet their lives on a rescue or perfect timing. When that hope failed, the capsule became their tomb. For decades, the bay's cold waters preserved their bodies, locking the truth in silence. The survival capsule was both a triumph of human will and a grim reminder that even the smartest plans can turn into prisons of their own making. What went wrong? The survival capsule proved the men had escaped Alcatraz, but it also revealed the fatal flaw in their plan. Experts now believe the capsule was never designed for long-term survival. Its air system was crude, relying only on limited oxygen flow, and once sealed, it offered no failsafe. Investigators found evidence of food stores, water, and even makeshift tools, but nothing that could sustain life for more than a short period. The most likely cause of death was suffocation, the air running out faster than expected. Strong bay currents may have shifted the capsule deeper into the mud, blocking ventilation and leaving them with no escape. Another possibility is that they were waiting for help that never came. An accomplice who was delayed or simply abandoned them. Frank Morris's notebook, recovered inside, hinted at despair. One line read, "We got out. We beat them, but we can't risk the surface." Another added chilling finality, "Not how we planned it." These fragments paint a picture of men who came closer to freedom than anyone imagined, only to be undone by timing and circumstance. They didn't drown in the bay. They suffocated in silence, trapped by the very creation that was meant to save them. Families find closure for more than 60 years. The families of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers lived in limbo, torn between hope and despair. The Anglin's mother clung to the belief her sons had survived,